Welcome back to Sika. Welcome back to the Department of Sports Psychology and Mythology. In today's video, what we're going to be doing is I've trawled through some of our kind of more recent or bigger sports psychology videos we've done on the channel. I've picked out a few questions. What we're going to do is with these 4 questions today, and just to give you a little peek ahead, these questions are going to revolve around motivation and discipline, difference between injuries and just being a small bit hurt, motor cognition and how you can learn faster, and then the final thing is going to be realistic versus unrealistic expectations and how they might affect the outcome. So the first question, all that being said, is from Weighted Sum, a regular commenter on the YouTube. He says, can you guys elaborate more on strategies to improve consistency when training? He's basically saying that he trains alone. Sometimes his diet will be super consistent and his training won't be, or his recovery protocols will be very consistent, but his training won't be, and these things kind of fluctuate from week to week. There's a couple of things to note here. When we talk to athletes at seminars, at training camps and things like this, we always go through goal setting, right? And one of the acronyms you use for goal setting is SMART goal setting. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and timely goals. The 2 things I really want you to concentrate on though are that attainable and realistic, right? So when you're setting out a training plan like you're talking about here, where you take diet into account, you take recovery protocols into account, and you take the training and competing itself into account, you have to make sure these things you're talking about doing are attainable. A lot of the time we have people falling off and they're saying, I'm not super motivated to train, or geez, I find it really hard to be disciplined with my diet. A lot of the time, the things they're setting out for themselves aren't that attainable. They might be saying, I'll only cook or I'll only eat prepped meals and prep my nutrition on 6 out of the 7 days of the week, or I'm going to train 12 times a week, or I'm going to do ice baths and contrast therapy 3 times a week, whatever it might be, whatever protocols you want to follow. If you have a full-time career, or if you're full-time in academia, or you might be coming up to your finals, or you might just have other things going on in your life that are taking a small bit more of your time, these things may not be attainable for you. And that's where I really want people to start off with this. If they're finding their motivation is waning or their discipline is waning, the first place I like people to start off with is just a small bit of an audit of the things they hope to achieve versus what they're doing right now. So if you're only getting in 3 sessions a week right now and you work full time and it's difficult to get those 3 sessions done, there's no point going to a coach or getting a program that's 5 or 6 days a week of training, unless you've made a drastic change in your life and your lifestyle and your work environment. It's probably not going to be too possible to go and do all that stuff. The next thing you should probably think about is is this actually going to be relevant to me? Is this being super strict with nutrition while being super strict with training, while being super strict with all the recovery protocols you want to do? Is it going to be super relevant? And where this really comes in is you should be prioritizing what's more important. If you're in a stage in your program or stage in your training where you have to drop body weight or change body weight, then it's much more important that you focus on your nutrition than focus on the tiny intricacies of your skill development and training, and vice versa. If you're coming up to a competition and you're pretty much within the weight bracket, you're not going to be really focusing on getting better body composition right now. If it's like a power sport or a speed sport, you should just be focusing on training, getting your training sessions in, making sure you're appropriately fueled for those and hydrated for those sessions, but you're really focusing on the training and the sport and the doing right then. This prioritization is a place where people get very, very caught up. They get it mixed up in their head because it's really important they do everything at once. And a lot of us have this kind of completionist mentality where you have to do everything right now and it only works if I do absolutely everything. Realistically, if you do number 1 on your priorities list and you get half of number 2 done and you briefly touch off number 3, you're going to get 90% of the results you would have gotten anyway. So make sure you're being kind of achievable or attainable with those things you're trying to hit, or that framework you're trying to set out for yourself. Make sure the things within that framework are actually relevant, and make sure you're prioritizing those things within the framework to make sure you're hitting the most important things at the most important time of your training block. Next we have that too guy. I wonder, is that he's the guy who always says, oh yeah, that too? Or maybe the number 2 means something to him. Could you do something on the difference between injury and an owie? In wrestling, we used to call it the difference between being hurt and injured. Maybe a Sika psychology video. So it's not strictly within the realms of psychology, but we'll certainly touch on this because I think this is really important. Right, so number one thing to note firstly is that some pain and some discomfort just kind of comes along with sport. If you're trying to bring about physiological adaptation, so make a muscle bigger, make a muscle stronger, make joints stronger, make tendons stronger, you get bigger, you get smaller, all of these things will bring about a certain amount of discomfort. That's perfectly normal. One of the main skills of being an athlete is understanding the difference between this discomfort, a discomfort that you might deem to be necessary for physiological adaptation, and then a discomfort or a pain that comes about through an injury, right? Injuries will fall into two categories. You might say acute and chronic injury. Acute and chronic injury have the same basic outcome where they pull you out of your sport and you're no longer able to train. People will think because they have knee pain that's chronic, that comes about all the time after every session or every week, they'll have some amount of knee pain or back pain if they're a weightlifter. These things are not good. They will pull you out of your sport. Just because it's there all the time doesn't mean it's something you should put up with. Now, if every time you do a lot of hypertrophy work in your quads, your back, you get aches and DOMs and that soreness, that's chronic pain, that's chronic discomfort, but it's probably necessary for the adaptation. Something like chronic pain in the elbow or the knee isn't necessary for adaptation, and you should be singling that out, basically putting a roadblock here and saying, I'm going no further until I've fixed it. In the same way where if you were to break your arm or somebody tackled you from the side and broke your kneecap, you wouldn't continue on with the understanding that you're in pain now and it's uncomfortable to do the movements, but I have to continue on because this is my part of my sport, you know. Whether it be chronic injury or acute injury, you need to fix that immediately. So that would be the main thing I'd say to that two guy, is that there's big differences between the discomfort that's necessary for adaptation and the discomfort or pain that comes along with an injury. And when you do have that injury, be it a chronic injury or an acute injury, you must fix the injury immediately and know that you're just going to stop. Now, it's different if you're 2 weeks out from the Olympics or from Worlds. You can probably push through that injury and get there in the end. But if you're just a recreational athlete training in your own time, not being paid to train, you're probably better just to stop immediately and fix the issue. Next question. Elective throws. Our favourite Scottish thrower says, quality video, a topic for Sika psychology could be developing good habits to improve learning complex motor or sequences of movements. This is a very good question, and it's something I'm unbelievably interested in. If some of you caught that live stream of the kind of bad camera angle and bad audio of our Sika psychology talk at our weightlifting camp, you would have heard some stuff around this, around motor cognition, around setting yourself up to be in a better place to learn movements or learn movements faster. There's a number of things here. In terms of like a psychological trick or a psychological intervention, most of the current research or most of the academic stuff out there at the moment would kind of be in agreement that AOMI, so that's action observation in combination with mental imagery, is very, very effective in getting to people to learn a complex motor pattern faster. We'll do some other stuff. We have videos on mental imagery on the channel. You can just go and search those and pick them out. I'll put a link in the description down below. But there's a couple of other kind of environmental factors and factors that you can control that will put you in a much, much better position to learn and pick up movements faster. So the first thing is sleep and stress related, right? And I'd call this psychological readiness. So if we have lower levels of sleep or lower levels of sleep quality, you're going to be much, much slower at learning a movement. In the same way where a baby will do most of its learning and most of its kind of neural remapping when it's asleep, we're the exact same. We have far less neuroplasticity, and if anything, the sleep becomes even more important to us learning a movement. So if you are taking up a new sport or you're trying to develop your technique further in a sport, this will be the time where you really periodize that focusing on sleep, right? So when we talked earlier about adherence to certain parts of your training path or certain parts of your training plan more or less at certain times, if you're really developing a new skill, it's not the time to be pushing sessions really hard later in the evening. It's not the time to be getting up early in the morning to get an extra gym session in or a run in before you go to work or before you go to school or college or university. this is the time to prioritize sleep. You go and you do your specific practice, high skill level practice, and then you prioritize sleep when you're there. Other things that will affect this are general stress markers. So if you're an accountant and it's coming to end of quarter or end of year for a lot of your clients, this isn't the best time to be learning a new motor pattern. If you are a student and you're approaching finals, then just wait until the summer is coming and you have far less stress and most of your life is just quite monotonous and you don't have to really focus on things. When you're learning new movement patterns, you want to keep psychological stress as low as possible. Just to give a brief bit of background on this, certain things will alter our neuroplasticity. So you can imagine neuroplasticity as, in an abstract way, as being how literally plastic our brain is, how easy it is for us to change those neural pathways, how easy it is to link certain synapses together to just get those motor units firing at the same time, So if we have heightened levels of stress, heightened levels of systematic stress within us, we will have increases or heightened levels of stress hormones such as cortisol, and these things will act on the brain to make the brain less neural. If you're being chased by a tiger, if it is very cold outside for months and months in a row, or if you are starving, the last thing you need to do is learn things very quickly. What you need to do is you need to react immediately to the stress that's in front of you, and then you can go and learn things later on. So it's important to note that when we're under high levels of stress, the actual plasticity of the brain and those synapses and all of those motor units that are trying to be fired further down the stream, they're not as active, and we certainly won't be able to learn as well if we're under stress. The next thing is, moving on from the psychological side of things, you need to be physically very prepared, right? So if I'm trying to learn the snatch for the first time, and like in your case, if you're a thrower and you're trying to learn the snatch for the first time, you certainly shouldn't be learning it on the days where you're very fatigued. So what you want is, you want all of your muscles, all your joints to be nicely primed and tapered. So when you go into a session, you don't want any inhibition of fine motor control through fatigue. You don't want any DOMS, like delayed onset muscle soreness, restricting that range of motion around your joints. You don't want any amount of tiredness or lack of capacity to stop you being able to do enough practice. So you need to make sure the actual meat vehicle you're driving around in isn't sore, tight, tired. And then you also need to make sure you have a necessary level of physical conditioning where you can do enough practice, or as much practice as possible, to learn that pattern quickly. The final thing I will say, and this is very much a thing we push here, is you have to have a system of learning. So there's no point going to a gym and sitting down with a coach or doing a session with someone and saying, I'm going to learn the snatch, and just try and do the full movement immediately, straight away. Now, certainly doing the full movement is incredibly important, and you might use a whole part whole method, or you might use a block training or block teaching method, but you need a system. It doesn't matter what system you have. So for the snatch, it might be you'll go from the top down, where you'll go high hang, mid hang, low hang from the floor, or you go from bottom up. Whatever the system is, it's incredibly important, if you're trying to learn things quickly, that you have a system. And this system exists in every single realm of physical movement. The final question we have then is from James Dillon Fulbright. Regarding sports psychology, it would be interesting to hear your perspective on what realistic versus unrealistic expectations are, and the consequences of putting yourself under illogical amounts of pressure. I'm going to mainly focus on the realistic versus unrealistic expectations here, because it's something that is, in the last 3 or 4 months, popping up more than anything else in the comments on our channel, right? So people are asking, what do you think I can expect to hit with 3 years of good training and pretty good genetics and natural, or what do you think a 18-year-old can hit if they had never done strength training before at 80 kilos body weight? There's a couple of issues here, and it's something I want to kind of translate when we have a bit of time to translate it now, right? So the first thing I want to chat about here is the fact that people oftentimes set these things of an expectation they have for themselves, and it will be basically this long-term goal that they'll constantly have in their head. They're only going to be happy if they achieve this, but they have no roadmap to get there. They just have this end goal in sight. This is the time when they'll be happy. All the work they'll put in for the next 15 years of training to get there, they'll be really happy when they get there. There's two issues with this, right? So the first thing is you're not setting any short-term or medium-term plans in place, a roadmap for you to get there. And then the second thing is that kind of outcome-orientated goal setting, or that outcome-orientated motivation is incredibly poor for adherence to training. What we really want is you want to be optimizing your process, optimizing everything around your training, where you really enjoy going to training. You enjoy sticking to the dietary stuff. You enjoy everything about the sport it is you're doing right now. And then the outcomes will just come. They'll come as you follow that roadmap we talked about, where once you go and you hit that short-term goal, the medium term then becomes the short term. You put something else in for the medium term, and it's just this conveyor belt of setting a goal, setting out a plan to get there, achieving all those steps along the way. Things fill in afterwards, and you continuously just go along the process. You really, really want to stick to this thing of the process is the most important thing. Don't be setting an expectation for yourself of, I'm going to achieve X, Y, or Z by 5 years' time. Instead, you should be thinking, I really like training 4 times a week, and I'd love to train 5 times a week. What do I have to do to get it to where I can be in the gym 5 times a week? Do I have to change around my work schedule? Do I have to change around how much attention I pay to my recovery? Do I have to sacrifice other things in my life? Do I have to go out drinking less? Do I have to go on holidays less? Do I have to be more diligent when I'm in my training sessions and making sure I'm only spending 50 minutes in the gym and then leaving and going home, so then I'm afforded that right or that ability to go training a 5th session a week? They're the things you should really be taking into account with your kind of realistic versus unrealistic expectations, you know. And this links in really well to the question we had at the very start with adherence to it, and that kind of making sure things are achievable and making sure things are relevant. You really don't want to be just focusing on what's possible for me if I train really hard in 3 years. Instead, you should say, what do I enjoy about training? What do I enjoy about the process of powerlifting or weightlifting or CrossFit or soccer or rugby? And then how can I get more enjoyment out of it, or make sure this goes on for longer and prolong my career in training? So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have questions about any of the stuff we talked about, or further sports psychology questions, please pop them in the comments down below. As always, like, subscribe, do all that great stuff, and we'll talk to you soon.